okay, these are the type of apps that Holochain is optimized for.
Yeah, let's do that.
And the first large-scale app that runs on Holochain is called Holo, which is confusing until you get used to it. Holochain. And Holo, Holo kind of fulfills on these two types of applications. And actually provides a pretty good example of how these things can sort of be recombined in interesting ways. So Holo, this first application, combines a community resource management system with a tokenless mutual credit cryptocurrency and reputation system. And the community resource that we're managing is actually computing power and storage and processing. And the reason why we're doing that is because we're saying goodbye to the crypto vanguard, or at least that's how I see it. And when we started getting really excited about Holochain, we were like, okay, so...
When was that? By the way, how long has this been going on?
Well, Holochain has been kind of a vision since about 2006, and they really kicked off developing it about a year and a half ago. So a big problem that I had with blockchain, maybe you guys thought differently from the earlier presentation, but like I'm not a techie. And I don't feel totally comfortable experimenting, even myself, with next generation cryptographic software. That's the truth. And so I thought, okay, if I'm kind of like getting my feet wet, like I can't imagine the regular mainstream internet user wanting to get on board with distributed applications that work totally differently, right? Where you have to kind of carry a piece of the infrastructure with you in order to use them. So there's that, like how do we drive mainstream adoption of apps which are ultimately more equitable for their users, right? Even if it's kind of hard to recognize, like how do we do that? And also, it's a function of needing to make Holochain apps great. So apps, part of what make these centralized apps really wonderful for people, even though they're doing all of these pernicious things to our social world, is that networks themselves are very powerful, right? People kind of like feel like they have to use Facebook and Twitter because everyone is there, right? That's the power of the network. And so for Holochain apps to be really excellent and to start wielding some of the force of networks in general, we thought, okay, these need to be accessible for mainstream internet users. And so we're launching today Holo. And Holo is this application that decentralizes hosting, right? So currently, most of our social data sits on the servers, right? Google, Amazon, Facebook. So the idea was, okay, let's make a hosting ecosystem to break that up some so that people don't have to run full Holochain nodes. They can try out these distributed applications, sort of see if it fits like with their preferences, with their lifestyle. They can try these out through web browsers, right? And I know I was just talking about how the great thing about distributed apps is that each user owns their data and owns a copy of the application, right? But we needed to create a bridge back to the centralized web. And so Holo is a huge network of hosts. And I say a huge network of hosts because we were selling dedicated hosting hardware in our crowdfunding sale, and people purchased about 700 nodes. So we have 700 absolutely dedicated hosts worldwide already at the moment. The crowdfunding is still going on. And so these hosts will serve up distributed applications that run on Holochain to users who just want to try them out through a web browser. So it's kind of like an onboarding system where hosts, early adopters, experimenters are kind of like, presenting a life raft for people from the centralized web to ride on into our crypto future. Okay, so the way that this works with the crowdfund, so this would be one method of participating. If you're like, hey, this is actually an important cause that we change the infrastructure of the internet and the way that the digital economy works, if you want to participate in that, you can buy a hosting box, dedicated hardware. You can also run Holochain on your existing computers, right? And install Holo, and Holo, which again, first big app on Holochain, Holo will run in the background and provide storage, processing, computing power for these apps that are starting to be developed on Holochain. And in exchange, and this is the mutual credit part of it, is that you earn Holo fuel. And so people are making sort of micro payments to each other for hosting these distributed apps. Oh, already? Okay, so I'll just talk very, very quickly about how, so the way that this is set up to be a mutual credit system is that as an organization, we, Holo people, are keeping track of how much computing power we have on the network already through the crowdfund, and we're tying that to our ICO, our initial community offering. And so essentially, we're keeping track of this resource of computing and processing power to see how much of it there actually is. So sort of just like a tactical function, seeing how much there is on the network so that we can run our community offering in an ethical way, right? We're not just like releasing a ton of tokens and calling it a day. No, our currency is backed by this asset of computing power that we're aware of through the crowdfunding. And
so can I just ask, do you mean that the way that the ICO works is that people buy these machines?
No, the way that so we're setting up this, you can think of like we're setting up a hosting ecosystem through the crowdfund, where we're like, okay, you have hardware, or you're making this pledge to be a host, essentially. And that sets up this ecosystem of hosts. And then in the ICO, we are distributing that hosting power to people who want to use it to make their distributed apps accessible to the mainstream.
So you're selling hosting services?
Exactly.
For normal life.
Mm-hmm. And our project lead, Jean Russell, is here on a video call to give a little more information on the ICO, how it works.
So, hello, Amy. Can you mute?
Unmuted.
Let's see if it's dunkler machen. Can we make it a little darker in here? So we can see it? Is that possible?
Yay!
Hello.
Hey.
Hello.
Hello, all the people.
Hello, Jean.
Hello.
Guten Nacht.
Good night. You want us sent to sleep?
No!
Is there a way to
Not safe.
No, turning off the light.
Good enough, don't worry. It's good enough. Yeah, Jean, we're ready for you.
All right, so Emmeline has talked a little bit and explained Holo and Holo Chain, right?
Yes.
Yes. And so I was going to start with why Holo, and I'll give you a couple reasons, and then I would love to hear from others. So to me, because I've been working on thrivability for like a decade, I'm really interested in a couple core concepts. I'm interested in people having agency and autonomy. And I feel like decentralization is one of the great ways that we can have that. And so when blockchain came along, it felt like it opened that door to how do we have greater agency and autonomy. And the problem with that was it's very private, which is good, but anonymous, which isn't always good. And then it's not scalable and it's not efficient for our kind of like daily interactions. So Holochain, to me, helps solve that problem, right? Especially being interested in thrivability, it's a much more environmentally aware approach to the problem. And then lastly, I think Holo matters because it makes the internet accessible to everyone. It's not just for a small share of people. You know, it's allows people to access decentralized applications through the web experience, and then rewards people for hosting. So I would love if anybody in the group there has some other things that they would like to add on why Holo, if we could do a popcorn for a minute.
So in terms of why Holo, Jean, I was kind of talking about how the power of networks is part of what makes applications great. And we want distributed applications on Holochain to be able to wield that kind of power, right? That Facebook has, that Twitter has.
Right, the locked-in network should come to an end.
What do you mean by locked-in network?
I mean, you don't want to leave Facebook because all your friends are over there, so even if you try leaving, like 2 weeks later, you're like, but all the people that I want to talk to are still there.
I mean the walled garden. That's what
Pardon?
The walled garden? The walled
Yeah,
garden.
it's a bit of a walled garden, and the way that Holochain works, applications should be interoperable with each other, and so even if you decide that you like some other feature and you start using a different application, your network comes with you. So those should, for the most part, remain interoperable.
I didn't actually understand that. You didn't either. Could you explain that in more detail? We didn't understand it.
Right, so because Holochain applications they're like atomized as opposed to like Facebook, walled garden, all these different things that Facebook can do are all within that walled space. Holochain is much closer to, there's a bunch of core applications that get used together and then smaller applications that get added on. So I can move to this similar sibling application, but I'm still touching into this application that's network application or identity application that's at the root. So it's not a walled garden. I have to rebuild everything from scratch every time I create an application.
For me,
Does that help?
kind of like the garden with the walls knocked down.
Yes. Well, and you're like, oh, I've got a new strain of carrots that have this characteristic. Would you like them too? Like you can share those things more easily.
What happens, just hypothetically, I was thinking this during your presentation, what if Google got interested and it said, or Facebook, and it said, hey, we're going to put a developer team up and we're going to create a for-profit app on the Holochain and put it into the Holochain ecosystem and make money off these people.
How are they making the money?
I don't know. I'm new to this. I'm asking you. I mean, could they do that? Could they do that? Could they create a for-profit app?
I believe so. I believe anybody could create a for-profit app. The question would be, would they make money at it? So, for example, I imagine that we'll have this, I'm hoping to facilitate the growth of a bunch of sharing economy applications that are like Airbnb or Lyft, and those will be for-profit applications. But hopefully their governance structure is co-op, and so the profits from that are shared between the people who are participating. So I imagine that the people who are joining Holo and Holochain, for the most part, are going to be people that don't want to have that centralized control structure. So it's not that we will block people from making profits. I don't think that's the way to go, but are the people who are participating interested in that? And would you be able, what would you do there that would be able to make the kind of profits that would be sexy to somebody like Facebook because they can't corner it off enough?
I don't know. I think if enough people wind up joining Holochain and becoming users of the Holochain ecosystem, then the power of network effects will kick in, and the sharks will smell the blood in the water, and they'll start thinking of ways that they can leverage that network effect for their own profit.
Right.
Even if they weren't anarchists like the initial early adopters.
Yeah, I hear you. And I will answer this question and then I should get on with the next piece, but let me answer this question because this is fascinating to me. There's this guy, Tom van Asseldonk, who's done a bunch of economic research that suggests that with craft building, one person builds the entire table, that's a certain level of efficiency. He gets pretty good at building a table. But then when you move to factory production, you get a level of productivity, a significant gain because he's just working on the leg and he partners with the guy who works on the top and everything. What Tom has shown is that the level of productivity increase you get from having customization is significant above factory production. So it's this third tier of production. And Facebook, to me, feels like it fits in this last phase of a factory production model. I believe that we're moving towards a much greater a space of this greater atomization that will allow for everybody to be able to customize their experience. And because they cannot wall that garden off and justify the cost for paying their servers and doing advertising, that would become an impossibility. I can't guarantee it, but that's my bet.
Okay, well, time will tell.
Pardon?
Time will tell.
Can I also just add to that and say that what I was talking about earlier, problems with the digital economy, pretty much the entire profit structure, the business model of all of these huge apps is precisely just holding that data and selling it at their leisure. So it's kind of like we're blocking off the major way that they've figured out to make money off of people, and haven't really posed many more. So provocation.
You could basically create a Facebook which says we collect the data, and all the people who want to take part, they can take part.
Sure. Yeah, that's on the map.
Okay.
So at Holo, basically this is an accelerator project. We are building a dynamo that can dramatically accelerate the creation of a decentralized application ecosystem.
So tell us about the ICO, Jean.
All right. Pardon?
Nobody said something.
Nobody said anything.
So how much did we talk about crowdfunding?
I talked about the crowdfund. Are we clear on that for the most part? You guys are aware of the crowdfund and everything, yeah?
So we have the crowdfund that's saying here's the devices and the developers that are building out the ecosystem, and we have the currency that enables the economy for that.
Yeah.
Is everybody clear on that part?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to cover, just to make sure that we've got it, the asset-backed mutual credit aspect of the currency. So asset backed, it's about a real thing in the world, hosting, and mutual credit, instead of just coming out of nowhere, a form of fiat currency, it's a mutual credit, meaning it's an accounting system that says you go up one, I go down one, and the accounting for that is the currency. So I'm debating whether to ask questions, and I think I'll jump next into just, so what does that mean for the ICO? So the crowdfunding has said, here's this ecosystem, and here's how many people want to have holoports that are going to do the hosting, and here's developers that are learning and starting to use Holochain. And so now we're going to see how much does that mean we need to release in terms of the economy to support that activity. So our initial release will be 2.5 million in euros, and then depending on the activity in the crowd fund, we will release more funds into the ICO. And that way we can be responsible to the ecosystem that we're trying to create together. And this is also a way of saying, this is not just something that we're holding all of. We want to share out and create this ecosystem with others so that others have a stake. And we want to make sure that nobody has too big of a stake, that they can tip or control the ecosystem by themselves. So there's a limit to 10% of the supply per day so that we don't have any whales coming in and completely taking over our system. So in our process for that, as part of our trying to be super responsible, we're getting whitelisting, which started today. Yay! With email and photo and passport, which is similar to just getting a wallet. And then once we're open, we will be accepting Ether. So that's my super fast overview of the ICO. What are your questions?
What did she mean by we're going to release 2.5 million? Did she mean that we're going to sell enough tokens to raise or not?
Up to, it's the cap. Yeah.
Yeah, already 25 minutes.
2.5.
2.5 minutes.
That's the maximum cap on the amount of Holo fuel that we will sell or allow to be created.
For now.
For now, yeah. And that will increase based on the success of the crowdfund, which is still halfway through.
The more hosts they have, the more fuel we will have, and then we can increase.
Yep.
That's the point.
And what does it mean for now? Is it like this period of 1 month or?
Yeah, because we're about halfway through